Time to Talk with host Jennifer Graziano of Zion Memorial Chapel and CoxeAndGraziano Funeral Homes. Jennifer is here to discuss a sensitive subject we all need to talk and think about. Here now is Jennifer Graziano and Time to Talk.
Good morning, Westchester. It's 9 a.m. on Monday, and that means it's time to talk with me, Jen Graziano. I'm a licensed funeral director who oversees my family's funeral homes, CoxeAndGraziano of both Mamaroneck and Greenwich, and the Zion Memorial Chapel of Westchester. Every Monday, I come to you discussing important topics and sensitive matters that all of us need to pause and reflect upon at some point. And through this show, I hope to provide a platform to do so. If you're joining us on air this morning on 1460 WVOX, a Whitney Global Media station, we will take your questions, comments, and calls to 914-636-0110. Good morning to the control room. And good morning, Facebook Live viewers. It is so wonderful to be back with you. I'm here with Tim Judge, the man behind the camera, and my good friend on this side, Terri Agliardo, the in-house bereavement counselor at CoxeAndGraziano Funeral Home that so many of you have come to know and love. And Terry's important work continues with us now, probably going over a second decade, right? Have we hit 20 yet?
Almost 20 years.
Well, in a good way, it feels like a lifetime. I know when you say it feels like forever, that gets a bad connotation, but I mean it with love. If it has been 20 years, it's been a great ride. Again, really happy to be here today. Being back live feels really good to be home at WVOX. And we're talking about why I think this show is so important and well-timed. This season, the holiday season, it's either the greatest time of year or the absolute worst time of year if you have lost someone that you love. Whether or not you lost them in this past 2022, whether it's 1, 2, 5, 10, or 20 years ago, the pain of loss is so palpable during the holiday season. And for that, we have Terri that has helped so many people navigate through the season. And we are doing a program this Saturday at CoxeAndGraziano that's open to the whole community. All are invited to attend, entitled Hope for the Holidays, where we combine religious aspect and prayers. And we have the wonderful Father Joe Tierney, the pastor of St. Gregory the Great, St. Vito's, and we have Terri. So I'm going to let Terri, we'll talk a bit about the program, and we'll give you information on how you can become part of that. But we're really going to talk about, Terri, this is, I struggle with it myself. It's awful.
It is.
It's awful. And everyone is smiling, and you go through motions, especially if you have kids and you're trying to put it together. But when your body's forced to be in it and your heart and head are not, it's an awful place to be, my friend.
It is. You get in the car, you put on the radio, and you hear Christmas music. You go into the store, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's a department store, you hear Christmas music. And you say to yourself, I am in the throes of the grief journey, and I have to listen to this, and you want to run out. But you know you have to do certain things. And so you're in that conflict of what you have to do versus what you don't want to do. And that causes a great struggle for those who are in the throes of the grief journey and yet are surrounded by the holiday season. And if you have children, it's difficult, because you want to make the holiday joyful for them, but at the same time, your heart's breaking, and you don't know what to do. And what I tell the people in the bereavement group is you can only do what you can do. And yes, you do for your children, but then you have to say to yourself, I need to take a step back. I need to breathe. And whether that is, going into your room and just separate for a little bit, or, taking a walk, just to regroup for yourself, because it can be so overwhelming.
It really is. And, you go through so many other emotions too, that you don't want to bring down the crowd.
Right.
You get invitations everywhere. And I think that, I mean, I worked in the areas of grief, bereavement, and loss my whole life.
Right.
Until you walk through it in the most personal, intimate way, you really don't understand the journey. You can be more than willing to help and be supportive, but until you've walked that walk, I don't think you'll ever fully understand the experience. But you're so mindful of, again, you don't want to be the downer of the crowd, but you really, a lot of people put a mask on this
Correct.
time of year, this false bravado that, everything is fine. Do you find that come like January, February, that it just really catches up with somebody, or are people just able to say, okay, thank God this is over January 2nd?
I think what happens is people tend to put forth their best effort to get through it, because the only way you can survive, quote unquote, the holiday season after a loss is just to get through it. And you breathe a sigh of relief that the holiday season is over, but you're still grieving. You're still having to deal with the day-to-day loss experience of your loved one. So even though the holidays are over, you're still dealing with that loss experience.
So I think that's a good segue to talking about time. We're talking about the timetables now when the holiday's over. But let's talk about time in the sense that when the loss is not so recent. I think one of the misconceptions about grief to the outsider, again, who hasn't gone through this experience in an intimate way, is there are misconceptions that one should be over it or healed or cured, whatever. And somebody who's experienced a loss even 10 years ago could still go through this angst during a holiday season, just as raw as somebody who's experienced a loss months ago.
Correct.
So what do you say to that person who is really lingering in that grief?
One of the things about grief is that you may feel that you're okay with the passage of the years. And then all of a sudden, there's a trigger, some event, or another loss that brings to the surface everything that you experienced back when your loved one died. And it brings it all up and you're back to where you were.
So, for example, that you a friend experiences a loss.
Right.
It's another loss that's not directly connected to you.
Correct.
But stirs up
everything that you went through. And so you're back to where you started from and you say, this is impossible. I thought I dealt with this. Mm-hmm. You're going to experience triggers all of your life after you've lost someone. It happens. It's the way life is. You hear a song, it triggers. It's just part of the natural order of things. It's part of the grieving journey. When people say, come on, get over it, you get over a cold, you get over the flu. You don't get over the loss experience because the person may have died. Their body died. The relationship doesn't end when that final ritual of placing that person in their final resting place takes place. It doesn't end. Love doesn't end. The relationship just takes on a different form. And I get very resentful when I hear, get over it. Get over what? They're still part of my life. They're still part of your life. When, on a personal note, this Thanksgiving was just as bad for me as it was when my dad first died. And he'll be gone 5 years in April. And I said, what was it? And it was everything else that I had experienced during this year that came to the surface and made it worse. And so I knew what was happening on a cognitive level because of my training, but it didn't make it any easier because I'm trained in the field. It still broke my heart. I missed him terribly.
You definitely don't have a pass to get out of grief for the work that you do, nor do you have the answer, sadly. I mean, I think that's one of the supreme ironies, that you do so much to walk everyone else through this journey, and there's probably no one that could walk you through it the same way. So I recognize that. And again, it's not so much, I think that's an interesting point that you made. It's not only a subsequent loss or an unconnected loss that can trigger this. It could be your own life events that are going on, or anything going on in the world, or anything just going on that is just stirring up emotions. And it goes right back to that deepest wound and that darkest place of the loss that you have. These are tough things to deal with, but we always say, if you don't deal with the grief will deal with you.
Correct.
And there are physical manifestations of grief. I wholeheartedly believe now more than ever, the mind-body connection is so real. And, grief can make you physically sick.
Correct.
Sadness, depression can make you physically sick. So anybody out there who thinks, that there's only a physical component to the body, that it's just it's so not true. Terri, is your advice the same to people with a loss that's happened a while ago as it is with a current loss? Or do you kind of have a different checklist of things that need to be done for each of those situations?
Well, I think when it's a recent loss, what I always recommend to people is, when they see the dust settling a little bit, I'm always concerned because of the mind-body connection. I always recommend that they go and see their doctor and get a physical, because grief can have very profound physical ramifications on the body. And it's always good to go get a checkup and tell your doctor what you've been through. For, people who have gone through a recent loss. And then I always suggest, whether it's a recent loss or whether it's a loss from the past that has resurfaced, I always recommend journaling. Write it down so that you can keep an account of how you're feeling. Write a letter to the person. Maybe things happened, the circumstances of the death didn't allow you time to say all the things that you wanted to say. And those things need to be said so that healing takes place. So I always recommend journaling. I always recommend setting time to give yourself permission to grieve. I also say to people, you do what is in your comfort zone. And that's so important, because sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. And you have to say to yourself, that's okay. I'm okay with this. If things are different, so be it. Because you are forever changed.
There's that moment.
You are never the same ever again after you have gone through a loss experience.
There's that a loss puts you into two people, the person you were before the loss and the person you'll be after.
Right.
And those are two very different people.
Right.
for better or for worse sometimes, but those are two very different people. Terri, what do you suggest? There's, you want to maintain tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone is gone, you want to make sure that you're upholding tradition, passing down tradition, especially if there's children involved. You want to continue traditions, but sometimes you get so stuck in maintaining the tradition that you often don't invite in new ones, which perhaps is a good thing in the aftermath of losses, to create something new.
Correct.
How do you advise people on walking that line between, change is very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on who has passed and who's sitting at that family table, change is often more difficult for the older people sitting at that table than the younger. It's just human nature. But how do you advise people to walk that line between maintaining the old and creating a new?
I think you talk to your family. I think you say to your family, what is it we want to keep? And what is it that we can start anew? And if there's children involved, ask them. Children are very creative and children are very resilient.
Very true.
And they may come up with some suggestions about how to change things up a little bit by adding a new tradition that makes that holiday just a little bit lighter.
And they feel part of the creation of the tradition, which is wonderful as well. That's great. Great
and that's
advice.
Something that they can carry on, that they start and will continue down the line. I think sometimes when there's children involved and a family member has died, they feel pushed aside because the adults want to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're grieving too. So let's sit down and say, okay, Christmas is coming. What do we want to do to honor Grandma, to honor Grandpa, to make them part of our tradition, even though they're not physically here?
Mm-hmm.
And let them work it out. And the adults have to go with it. Regardless of how much your heart is aching, you do it for the kids. And when it comes from the kids, it's genuine, it's real, it's pure, simple.
Kids will certainly save Christmas for anyone who's grieving.
That's right.
Children, they really save Christmas. And it does make you want to believe when you see, I went yesterday to Rockefeller Center with Mia, and it was probably the best thing I could have done.
Mm-hmm.
Beginning of the season, and you really can't help but be happy when you watch them. So I think that's great advice, to include children. And to also, I always say, be mindful of a child's grief. I think adults, unintentionally, but they're so ill-equipped with that. And there's this propensity, like you said, to shelter the child, which you do, believing that you're helping the child. But if you don't allow for their questions and allow for their expressions of, the things that they'll say or the questions that they'll ask, it does them a great disservice in the end. So really encourage your children, if anybody, if there are any children in the family impacted by loss, make them part of the conversation. That's so important. So this Saturday, December 10th at 3:00 at CoxeAndGraziano in Mamaroneck, we're hosting our annual event, which we've always entitled Hope for the Holidays, because it's entitled to give just that: the hope to get through, tips to get through, prayers to help remember. We have a special keepsake that we'll be giving. So anybody who wishes to come, we do invite you, but we ask you to call to reserve your place with us and to give us the name of your loved one so that we can best honor them at this service. We'll give our contact number at the end. Terri, you've been doing this service with us for years now. We kept it going during COVID. It's always been an important part of what we do. Talk a bit about the event and encourage people, to think about joining us on Saturday.
I think it's important that people come And I'll tell you why. It's a beautiful service. Father Tierney does a beautiful job with the spiritual, religious aspect of the service. It's a way to honor those that have died in a very special way for the holiday. And my part as the in-house bereavement counselor for CoxeAndGraziano is to give you tips on how to make it through the holiday season. Even though Thanksgiving has passed, Christmas is coming, Hanukkah is coming, Kwanzaa is coming, and they're all holidays to be celebrated. And it's very hard to celebrate when you're grieving. So I give you certain tips on how to do that. And I gave you some today in terms of including children in creating new traditions. Ask them what they want. Not what they want from Santa Claus, but what they want from your family gathering. What would they want to do to include the lost family member? Writing a letter, creating a quilt of things that from clothing that belong to the loved one, a pillow, things that could be hands-on activities that the family members could do together to honor the loved one. It's all about incorporating the person who is no longer physically with us, but is very much spiritually with us. And that is a really important piece that people forget. The relationship is never over. Love doesn't die when the person dies. It just takes on a different dimension. And that I can't not reiterate enough. Once we put our loved one in their final resting place, it's not over. Their body is at rest, whether it is through cremation or traditional burial in the ground or in a mausoleum. It doesn't end at that moment. It is going on for the rest of our lives. As long as we are alive and keep the memory of that loved one alive, that person lives on through us. And we shouldn't forget that. So we shouldn't be afraid to talk about our loved one.
I think that's important too. There's sometimes so much angst around saying their name, but I'm such a believer in speak their name. There's a beautiful poem, the author of whom is escaping me, but death is nothing at all. I have only slipped away into the next room. Speak my name and laugh as we always did. And that's so hard for some people. For some people, their coping mechanism is to just not mention at all. And for others, they need to do that. So even if you're at one family table and you have different views on that, that can be a little tricky. So again, conversations, acknowledgments, how are we going to do this? Have the hard conversations, folks, because there's only going to be, once you get past the discomfort, it's going to get easier. Our time is wrapping up. I want to make sure everyone knows to find us, CoxeAndGraziano.com, COXE, and spelled out, Graziano, GRAZIANO, or call us at 914-698-5968. Our number is also on the website. If you're interested in coming, we'd love to have you on Saturday. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know.
So much for my plug. Saturday.
At 3.
I'll see you on Sunday as well, but Saturday at 3 o'clock. And we have an ongoing bereavement support program that really has become an institution in the Sound Shore community. A lot of people have gotten to know you, T, and they love you and they're grateful for you, but you could always jump on. There's a lot of trepidation about going to a group and, preconceived notions about what a group setting is like. This is not that, guys. I promise you. It's just an inviting setting, especially on Saturday. We have a beautiful Christmas tree up. We're getting the mantle should be being decorated as we speak. But there's a warm, inviting nature when you walk in to CoxeAndGraziano. We're proud of that. And every other Saturday, we'll always give you information if you come. It's a free support group. There's so many bonds of friendship that have been formed because, again, spousal loss is different than parent-child loss. And while as everyone's well-intentioned to help each other, until you walk that walk, you have no idea what you're talking about.
That's right.
And I admit that as in the funeral business my whole life. And until I suffered the loss of my mother, I still don't know what I'm doing. So
it's very hard. And even though you've lost your mom, I've lost my mom. I lost my mom over a period of 5 years because she had Alzheimer's.
And that we could do a whole show on that.
Preemptive
grief.
Lose over a period of time. So when she finally died, it was a sense of relief. My father, he was here today and gone tomorrow. So it was a whole different experience of grief.
I agree. Loss is loss, but nonetheless, folks, there are ways to find help. And whether it's through us or someone else, we really encourage you, especially during the holiday season, find some hope, believe, and rely on the support of friends and family who love you. We hope to see you Saturday. Terri, thank you.
Thank you,
I
Jen.
love you. Tim, great to see
Love
you.
you too.
Thank you to everybody in the control room. This is Jen Graziano. Thank you for taking the time to listen as we took the time to talk. Have a great day, Westchester. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.